I want to greet you and welcome everyone to the Observatorio of the Spanish language and Hispanic culture in the United States. Welcome to this Instituto Cervantes at Harvard University, and welcome to this conversation in the Observatorio. It's a conversation today about Jorge Santayana, professor of philosophy right here in Harvard University. The Instituto Cervantes and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University have created this Observatorio of the Spanish language and Hispanic cultures in the United States. As some of you know very well, the Observatorio organizes and hosts seminars, conferences, and debates, among other academic and cultural activities. It is true that the Observatorio doesn't organize conversation about philosophy very often, but this is not the first activity, the first event on that field. Some months ago, the Observatorio hosted an event about analytical philosophy with Professor Susana Ziegel, and some weeks later, our series Informes del Observatorio Reports, published a special issue including all the presentations in that event. In this conversation today, we are lucky for having three experts in Santayana's life and work: Professor John Lachs, Professor Martin Coleman, Professor Daniel Moreno. But we are also lucky for having a very, very special guest. He will be the moderator of this conversation. He's a very, very well-known in Harvard University. I'm talking about Professor Sean Kelly, a professor of philosophy at Harvard. To a certain point, he's an heir of Santayana's position in this university. Sean Kelly's work focuses on various aspects of the philosophical, phenomenological, and cognitive neuroscientific nature of human experience. He holds a master in cognitive and linguistic sciences from Brown University in 1999 and received a PhD in philosophy from the University of California at Berkeley in 1998. He taught in philosophy and the humanities at Stanford and in philosophy and neuroscience in Princeton before joining the Harvard faculty in 2006. But let me say a few words about the other special guests. Professor John Lachs is professor in philosophy in Vanderbilt. He has worked in several fields: metaphysics, philosophy of mind, political philosophy, and ethics. John Lachs was general editor of the Encyclopedia of American Philosophy. He was also chair of the American Philosophical Association Centennial Committee. And among his most representative publications, we find the relevance of philosophy life, 1995, and Freedom and Limits, 2014. Even though today it is mandatory to mention Thinking in the Rings, Wittgenstein and Santayana in Contingency, co-author with Michael Hodges in 2011. Martin Coleman is professor of philosophy in Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. In 2000 and 2005, he received the Greenlee Prize presented by the Society for Advancement of American Philosophy. However, he is here today because he is the last editor of the most important work by Santayana, The Reason of Life, Reason in Common Sense, Reason in Society, Reason in Religion, Reason in Art, Reason in Science, the 5 books by Santayana, as well as the Essential Santayana, published by Indiana University Press in 2009. And besides, he's co-editor of the Bulletin of the George Santayana Society, or was, you are, right? And last but not least, Daniel Moreno is professor of philosophy in Zaragoza, in Spain, and editor of Limbo, International Bulletin of Santayana. He got his PhD from the University of Salamanca with the thesis, The Pathetic Fallacy, a key piece in George Santayana's thought. And finally, his book, Santayana Filósofo, La Filosofía como Forma de Vida, appeared in 2007, and a translation by Charles Padron has been published by Bucknell University Press. For a Spanish institution like Instituto Cervantes, it is a privilege to pay a tribute to a Spanish thinker like Santayana, with dignity and humility, as Santayana said about the Spanish personality and nature. This event will present a bilingual performance with the collaboration of Clara González Tosat, former research assistant of the Observatorio and currently teacher of Spanish at Boston College. So no panic about languages, we have a good translator. Santayana himself told a story about his English accent included in his book Person and Places. This is the first edition. And Santayana said in this book, in 1887, Russell, a good friend, once asked me to join him at his grandmother's Lady Stanley of Alderley, a great and venerable personage. And after we had exchanged a few phrases, Lady Stanley said, "But how well you speak English." That is a backhanded compliment that one ordinarily prefers not to hear, since it implies that one evidently speaks like a foreigner. So this is the Santayana sense of humor. Thank you, Professor Kelly, for being here today and for leading us. Thank you to the special guests today, Professor Lachs, Professor Coleman, Professor Moreno. I thank you all for being here. And please, Professor Kelly, do the honors.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be the moderator. I'm excited to learn about Santayana. The one major thing I know about him is that, correct me if I'm wrong, he retired from the philosophy department here at Harvard when he was 48 after having written a best-selling novel. And since I'm 49, I feel like I'm behind, but I think it's an important thing to have this as an inspiration. So we're going to start right here with Professor Moreno.
Sí, se oye bien. Bueno. Buenas tardes y muchas gracias por su asistencia. Me gustaría comenzar mi intervención agradeciendo al Observatorio, en la persona de su director, don Francisco Moreno Fernández, quien desde el principio acogió con entusiasmo la idea de acompañar a Jorge Santayana en este momento tan especial.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much to all of you for coming today. I would like to begin my intervention by thanking the Observatory, especially its director, Francisco Moreno Fernández, who from the beginning enthusiastically welcomed the idea of accompanying Jorge Santayana, George Santayana, in this special moment.
Por supuesto, he de agradecer al Departamento de Filosofía de la Universidad de Harvard por organizar esta mesa redonda sobre George Santayana. Gracias, profesor Kelly.
Also, I have to thank the Department of Philosophy at Harvard University for organizing this roundtable of George Santayana. Thank you, Professor Kelly.
Wait a moment. I have some problems. Bueno, no es. Sorry. Porque Santayana vuelve a casa con la obra que escribió siendo profesor aquí, The Life of Reason, pero vestida de gala, en una estupenda edición crítica. De modo que 110 años más tarde, aquí está de nuevo Santayana. La ocasión merecía ser celebrada. En un momento tan emocionante, no puedo dejar de acordarme de Charles Padron, el traductor de mi libro sobre Santayana.
So, Santayana returns home with the work he wrote as a professor here, The Life of Reason, in a newly revised edition. So 110 years later, here it is, Santayana again, and this occasion deserves to be celebrated. At such an exciting moment, I cannot help but remember Charles Padron, the translator of my book on Santayana.
En la Harvard Gazette de marzo de 2012 puede leerse que Stephen Greenblatt, comentando su libro sobre Lucrecio, El giro de Swerve, se refiere a Santayana como The Great Harvard Philosopher.
Harvard Gazette published in March 2012 a comment by Stephen Greenblatt on his book on Lucretius, The Swerve, How the World Became Modern. Greenblatt refers to Santayana as the great Harvard philosopher.
Y efectivamente, Si se leen las memorias de Santayana, Person and Places, Harvard College está muy presente. No en vano, aquí pasó 20 años de su vida, desde 1892 hasta 1912. Por eso, su única novela, El último puritano, que lleva como subtítulo Memoria en forma de novela, transcurre en gran parte aquí, en Harvard. Su protagonista, Oliver Alden, es un estudiante que tiene al mismo Santayana como profesor. Mi primera visita, por tanto, a Harvard fue de manos de la imaginación, mientras leía estos libros de Santayana.
Indeed, if you read Santayana's memoirs, Persons and Places, Harvard is actually very present. He spent 20 years of his life here, from 1892 to 1912. That's why his only novel, The Last Puritan, which is subtitled A Memoir in the form of a novel, takes place mainly here in Harvard. Its protagonist, Oliver Alden, it's a student that has Santayana as a professor. Therefore, my first visit to Harvard was through imagination as I read those Santayana's books.
Su gran vinculación a esta universidad y la importancia de sus ideas explican que Santayana sea considerado como a classical American philosopher. John G. Stuart lo incluyó en su libro junto a Peirce, James and Royce.
His great connection to this university and the importance of his ideas explain that Santayana is considered as a classical American philosopher. John J. Stuart included him in his book along with Peirce, James, and Royce.
Sin embargo, Santayana no estaba muy cómodo aquí. Él era quizá demasiado europeo, demasiado desasido. De hecho, renunció a su puesto de profesor a la edad platónica de la sabiduría a los 50 años, y en 1930 se reconoció culpable de una estrategia no del todo intencionada, decir en inglés tantas cosas no inglesas como fuera posible.
However, Santayana was not very comfortable here. He was perhaps too European, perhaps too detached. In fact, he resigned his teaching position when he was 50, what I personally call the Platonic age of knowledge. In 1930, he found himself guilty of a strategy not entirely intentional, to say, plausibly in English, as many un-English things as possible.
Sin embargo, es en Estados Unidos donde ha sido más leído, donde fue publicado en vida y donde se encuentra de Santayana Edition. Y es aquí donde se edita Over Here in Seville, boletín dedicado a Santayana y fundado en 1983 por Angus Lawson y Herman Satkham.
However, is it here in the United States where he has been most read? He was also published here while he was alive, and here it is the Santayana edition as well. And this is where Overhead in Seville is published, a newsletter dedicated to Santayana and founded in 1983 by Angus Lawson and Herman Satkham.
El título del boletín es muy acertado porque remite a España a través de Sevilla, una de las ciudades españolas más conocidas. Por cierto, también de Santayana Edition, coloca en su primera página una fotografía de la muralla de Ávila, también en España, dado que allí vivía Santayana, allí visitaba Santayana su familia.
The title of the newsletter is very successful because it refers to Spain, it refers to Seville, one of the most well-known Spanish cities. Also, the Santayana edition puts in its front page a photograph of the wall of Ávila. It's also in Spain, and it's where his family lived.
Y lo cierto es que Santayana era español. Había nacido en Madrid de padres españoles y había venido a Boston con su madre. Así lo explica él mismo.
The truth is that Santayana was Spanish. He was born in Madrid. His parents were from Spain as well, and he came to Boston with his mother. As he explained, my mother's older children from her first marriage were American on their father's side. And that fact caused my father to take me to Boston to be educated. But in feeling an illegal allegiance, I have always remained a Spaniard.
Madrid recuerda su nacimiento con esta placa conmemorativa donde puede leerse en español. Aquí estuvo la casa donde nació en 1863 el filósofo poeta y novelista Jorge Santayana, cuya vida y obra fueron un diálogo entre las culturas latina y anglosajona.
So Madrid remembers its birth with this commemorative plaque where it can be read, "Here was the house where Jorge Santayana, philosopher, poet, and novelist, was born. His life and works established a dialogue between Latin and Anglo-Saxon cultures."
Tras abandonar Estados Unidos en 1912, estuvo en Oxford durante la Primera Guerra Mundial, viajó por Europa durante 15 años antes de instalarse en Roma, la ciudad eterna. Allí murió en 1952. Está enterrado en el pabellón español del Cementerio Monumental de Roma.
After leaving the United States in 1912, he was in Oxford during World War I, and he traveled through Europe for 15 years before settling in Rome, the Eternal City. He died there in 1952. He was buried in the Spanish pavilion of the Monumental Cemetery of Rome.
Todo esto explica que el profesor español Manuel Garrido, en su monumental El legado filosófico español e hispanoamericano del siglo XX, reserve a Jorge Santayana un puesto de honor junto a Miguel de Unamuno y José Ortega y Gasset, y que en España se publique desde el año 1996 Limbo, un suplemento de la revista Teorema dedicado a Santayana. He aquí su último número.
Reserved to George Santayana, a position of honor next to Miguel de Unamuno, next to José Ortega y Gasset, and also the fact that it has been published in Spain since 1996, Limbo, which is a supplement of the magazine Teorema, dedicated to Santayana. Here it is, the last number.
También Manuel Garrido ha incluido 3 obras de Santayana en la prestigiosa colección Los esenciales de la filosofía de la editorial española Tecnos, La vida de la razón, 3 poetas filósofos y Diálogos en el limbo. En preparación se encuentra una selección de ensayos a mi cargo bajo el título de Ensayos de Historia de la Filosofía.
Also, Manuel Garrido has included 3 works by Santayana in the prestigious collection Philosophy Essentials, published by Tecnos. La vida de la razón, The Life of Reason, 3 poetas filósofos, 3 philosophical poets, and Diálogos en el limbo, Dialogues in Limbo. They're also working on a selection of essays under the title of Essays about History, the History of Philosophy.
Ahora bien, considero que si Santayana hubiera escrito en español, se le podría aplicar también su conocida frase: Santayana habría dicho en español tantas cosas no españolas como hubiera sido posible.
Now, I think that if Santayana had written in Spanish, he could also apply his well-known phrase to say possibly in Spanish as many un-Spanish things as possible.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Porque adopta un punto de vista que no es de ningún lugar en especial. No es americano, no es europeo, es simplemente humano. Por eso creo que es mejor calificarlo simplemente de filósofo, sin más adjetivos. En todo caso, se le puede reconocer como filósofo clásico, en el sentido de que no ha pasado de moda. Volver a leer a Santayana siempre recompensa.
Because it adopts a point of view that is not from any particular place. It is not American, it is not European, it's simply human. That is why I think it's better to simply call him a philosopher without further adjectives. In any case, it can be recognized as a classical philosopher, in the sense that he was not gone out of fashion. Rereading Santayana, it's always rewarding.
En Estados Unidos tiene muy buena salud. En la mesa se encuentran 2 representantes, uno de la generación senior, John Lachs, y otro de la generación junior, Martin Coleman. Ambas generaciones cuentan con numerosos integrantes. También en España, Santayana ha sobrevivido a la neoescolástica, a la filosofía analítica y al marxismo. Y no solo se le estudia en España, sino en toda Europa.
In the United States, Santayana's work has a really good health, with 2 representatives, one from the senior generation, John Lachs, and one from the junior generation, Martin Coleman. Both generations have numerous members. Also, in Spain, Santayana has survived neo-scholasticism, analytical philosophy, and Marxism. He's not only studied in Spain, but through Europe.
Han sido 5 los congresos internacionales dedicados a Santayana en Europa. El próximo congreso posiblemente será en Estados Unidos. Debería serlo al menos. ¿Y por qué no aquí, en su universidad? ¿Se puede decir que se han hecho verdaderas sus palabras?
There have been 5 international conferences dedicated to Santayana in Europe. The next one will probably be in the United States. It should be, at least. And why not here at your university? You can say that his words have become true. As a thinker, I was born at the wrong time and bred in the wrong way. I like to hope that someone might later revive parts of my philosophy in more favorable circumstances.
La filosofía significó para Santayana lo mismo que para los griegos: autonomía, libertad, deshacimiento. Como ellos, Santayana cultivó la razón, pero no el dogmatismo. Buscó la belleza, pero la encontró en lo cotidiano. Respetó la ciencia, pero no le permitiría ocupar el lugar de la religión, como respetó la religión, pero tampoco le permitiría ocupar el lugar de la ciencia.
Philosophy meant for Santayana the same thing it meant for the Greeks: autonomy, freedom, and disassociation. Santayana also cultivated reason, but not dogmatism. Sought beauty, but found it in everyday life. Respects science, but will not allow it to occupy the place of religion. And he respects religion, but will not allow it to occupy the place of science.
La lección que Santayana sacó de sus numerosos viajes fue el rechazo del provincianismo, rechazo del fanatismo y defensa del cosmopolitismo, y de la ironía, de su característico humor entre elegante y cruel. No en vano se le ha comparado a veces con la medio sonrisa de la Gioconda de Leonardo da Vinci.
The lesson that Santayana drew from his many journeys was the rejection of provincialism, rejection of fanaticism, and defense of cosmopolitanism, and irony of his characteristic humor between elegant and cruel. He has been compared to that half smile of Leonardo da Vinci's Gioconda.
Porque algo de enigmático tuvo siempre Santayana, no del todo bien comprendido en Harvard, donde el talante de William James era el dominante, ni en Europa, donde siempre fue más bien visto como una curiosidad. Resulta, por eso, completamente autobiográfico un texto como este.
It's, sorry.
Porque algo de enigmático.
Yeah. It's a way of understanding, I apologize for this. I double translated. Santayana, my fault, I apologize. Santayana was kind of a puzzling character, not quite well understood at Harvard, where the mood of William James was dominant, neither in Europe, where it was always seen as a curiosity. The following text seem completely autobiographical. Philosophy is not an optional theme that might occupy the philosopher on occasion. It is his only possible life, his daily response to everything. He lives by thinking, and his one perpetual emotion is that this world, with him in it, should be a strange world, which it is.
Es una forma de entender el ejercicio filosófico como camino de sabiduría. Nada extraño resulta entonces que se dedicara a la vida intelectual, alejado de los ambientes académicos, ni que Santayana encabezara el libro que ahora recordamos con una cita de la metafísica de Aristóteles. Hegar nu energeia zoe.
It is a way of understanding the philosophical exercise as a way of wisdom. It is not surprising then that he devoted himself to intellectual life, far from academic circles, or that Santayana led the book we now remember with a quotation from Aristotle's Metaphysics. For the activity of the reason, its life. From there comes the title of the work, The Life of Reason.
A pesar de titular esta sección Un libro para nuestro tiempo, dejaré esa cuestión para Martin Coleman y para el profesor John Lachs y recordaré simplemente los dos pensadores que más influyeron en Santayana en esta época, Lucrecio y Darwin.
In spite of giving this title, a book for our time, to our current section, I will leave that question for Martin Coleman and Professor John Lachs, and I will remember the two thinkers who most influenced Santayana at this time, Lucretius and Darwin.
Santayana cuenta en sus memorias que la obra de Lucrecio de Rerum Natura llegó a sus manos en una edición de bolsillo en latín sin notas, pero que se aprendió los grandes pasajes de memoria. Seguramente esta fue la edición que leyó.
Santayana says in his memoirs that the Rerum Natura came to his hands in a pocket edition in Latin without notes, but that he learned the great passages from memory, and surely this was the edition that he read.
La respuesta de Santayana al impacto de la obra de Charles Darwin fue reformular su filosofía desde el naturalismo. El ser humano no es ya un ser escindido entre la razón y los sentimientos, ni entre su parte divina y su parte humana. Es, por el contrario, un animal que desarrolla de modo natural la razón y su aspiración al ideal.
Santayana's response to the impact of the work of Charles Darwin was to reformulate his philosophy from naturalism. The human being is no longer a split between reasons and feelings, nor between his divine part and his human part. It is, on the contrary, an animal that naturally develops reason and its aspiration to the ideal.
El animal humano, empujado por el amor, constituye grupos como la familia y sociedades de distinto tipo, aunque su mejor compañía son los ideales.
The human animal, pushed by love, constitutes groups such as family and societies of different types, although its best company is the ideal.
De modo natural, el ser humano confía en la magia y construye religiones que le aseguren que es inmortal, aunque realmente la única inmortalidad a nuestro alcance es la inmortalidad ideal, volumen 3.
In a natural way, man relies on magic and builds religions that assure him that he is immortal, although really the only immortality within our reach is ideal immortality, in volume 3.
También de modo natural, el ser humano desarrolla la técnica y la industria, la música y el lenguaje, la poesía y la pintura, el arte en general, porque el arte produce felicidad, la gran aspiración humana.
Also, in a natural way, the human develops the technique and the industry, music and language, poetry and painting, art in general, because art produces happiness, the great human aspiration.
Finalmente, Santayana analiza en el volumen 5 cómo surgen los desarrollos humanos más elevados, la moral y la ciencia.
Finally, Santayana analyzes in the 5th volume how the highest human developments arise, morality and science.
Finalmente, considero que la genialidad de Santayana fue darse cuenta de que aceptar que somos animales no nos obliga a prescindir de nada de lo que somos capaces, el ideal, la belleza y la felicidad.
I think Santayana's work of genius was to realize that accepting the fact that we are animals does not force us to separate ourselves from anything that we're capable of, the ideal, beauty and happiness.
Feliz, feliz.
Go through all of them, or shall we stop the questions in between?
No, I think it's very...
Yeah, okay, excellent. Thank you, Professor Moreno. So we'll go on to Professor Martin Coleman, who will present his comments now.
Oh, I listen to Coleman, okay. Oh, I can... No. Whatever you want. Which you prefer? Over here? Okay, sure.
I'm pleased and privileged to take part in this celebration of George Santayana's 1905-06 work, The Life of Reason. That this celebration occurs in Cambridge with the support of Harvard University is appropriate, since The Life of Reason, which established Santayana's reputation as a significant thinker, earned him promotion in 1907 to full professor in the Harvard Philosophy Department. I thank Professor Francisco Moreno Fernandez, Executive Director of the Observatory, for hosting this event and inviting me to participate. Victoria Whitney, Program Manager for the Observatory, for providing information and making arrangements for my visit. And the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences and the Cervantes Institute for their support. It is an honor to be part of a panel that includes as moderator Professor Sean Kelly, whose advocacy for the humanities as a source of meaning has influenced how I think about teaching and living. Professor John Lachs, to whom I am indebted intellectually and professionally for his outstanding Santayana scholarship and his support of the Santayana Edition. And my friend, Daniel Moreno, a fine colleague and scholar who has taught me much about Santayana. And I thank all of you who have come to commemorate the work of George Santayana. It is gratifying to be here in Cambridge recognizing Santayana just as his teachers and colleagues have been recognized here in other events. One of these events, in which John Lachs participated, was the 2007 conference entitled William James and Josiah Royce, A Century Later, Pragmatism and Idealism in Dialogue, where I met a professor who asked me in an informal conversation about my work, who asked me in an informal conversation about my work. I answered that I was an editor at the Santayana Edition. The professor replied warmly that renewed interest in the philosophy of George Santayana would be a culturally salutary development. The exchange was brief, and I did not have the chance to ask why he believed a Santayana revival would be valuable, but I continued to wonder, what could this professor, known to me for political activism and social engagement, what could he find beneficial in the thought of Santayana, who, when he is known for more than a routinely mangled quotation about the past, might be seen as a sort of individualist or traditionalist, interested in contemplation and content to let worldly powers work their wills? What could Santayana's philosophy provide readers of varying political and social commitments? The answer is, I think, a vision of human life lived sanely in times of great change, and the 5 books of the Life of Reason articulate such a vision. Santayana's philosophy celebrates ideals arising from human capacities for consciousness and reason, which are inescapably rooted in material nature. His philosophy is a naturalism that acknowledges the power of the material universe and the legitimacy of human values without resort to superstition. In response to philosophical and popular irrationalism, whether chaotic or conformist, in response to the disruption of globalization or the confusion of social fragmentation, Santayana's philosophy maintains the value of reason, a plurality of values, and the possibility of consciousness liberated from distraction and worry. His thought acknowledges the intellectual heritage of different cultures without promoting the supremacy of a particular one. It is grounded in European traditions, but it also engages with the views of his American colleagues and draws deeply on Asian philosophical and religious traditions. His philosophy is open to the variety of human experience and respects the distinct character of the concrete individual of a particular time and place. Santayana accepted the limitations and losses of being mortal and held no illusions about the conflicted nature of human experience. But for him, this presented no obstacles also to valuing disillusioned imagination and spiritual freedom. Revived interest in Santayana's philosophy could mean increased attention to the variety of values in human life, respect for imagination without sentimentalism or escapism, and admission of the overwhelming immensity and power of a near-rational material universe coupled with a celebration of the potential of human consciousness. It could mean naturalism and reason would be esteemed highly enough to displace, more often than now, superstition and hubristic delusion in a human life. Such a philosophy has significance as a response to cultural conditions diagnosed by John Lachs and Michael Hodges. They have written of Santayana's philosophy as a response to a modern malaise resulting from the failed project of establishing foundations of certainty for human knowledge and values. The massive and extensive changes of the 20th century, social, political, and technological, shook long-standing traditions, including intellectual traditions that ground knowledge and values on foundations of certainty. Without traditional foundations, human life seemed to many to become meaningless. According to Lachs and Hodges, human values and practices came to be regarded as, quote, thoroughly contingent, lacking the certainty, rightness, or absolute justification prior generations insisted they could attain, end quote. Some responses to this contingency observed by Lachs and Hodges include, first, denial through affirmation of an eternal or divine or transcendental reality that would make contingency illusory. Second and third, nihilism and skepticism, which accept the demand for certainty but despair of ever finding it. Fourth, John Dewey's anti-foundationalism, which takes up contingency as a means to reconstruction and seeks resolution of concrete problems instead of universal certainty. And fifth, a postmodernism that seeks to interrupt the normal, embrace contingency, and question all established power structures. Lachs and Hodges have suggested that Santayana offered another sort of response to modern conditions by rejecting a search for certain foundations while maintaining the natural legitimacy of meanings and values expressed by the vital impulses and interests of our lives. Santayana abandoned certainty and offered instead a disillusioned and non-reductive naturalism that avoided the insanity of skepticism as a way of life, of supernaturalism or idealism that confuses ideas with existences, of humanism that ignores the infinite context of nature, and of philosophies that dismiss reason altogether. Daniel Moreno has argued that Santayana's thought can be understood as a dedicated pursuit of sanity. According to Moreno, Santayana's constant preoccupation was madness, for example, the madness of accepting illusions as truths, or believing ego to predominate over the natural conditions that produced it. Santayana acknowledged the ineradicable animal compulsion to believe myths, while he cultivated the ability of consciousness to transcend, though not eliminate, that natural compulsion. Santayana's philosophy guards against deceptive illusions while appreciating them as fruits of human consciousness, which may carry great symbolic import for actual living. The life of reason has its origins in just such an outlook. Santayana wrote that the idea for the work came to him in 1888, when, as a student of Josiah Royce, he first read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. He appreciated Hegel's subject matter, the history of human ideas, but he found the work ruined by the sophistry of connecting historical episodes with a dialectical chain, and by the myth that this history was the whole of cosmic evolution. He characterized such an approach as anti-natural, and thought a more honest inquiry into the history of ideas would trace human efforts to satisfy natural impulses in the natural environment. He attempted this in the Life of Reason, which he characterized as, quote, a summary history of the human imagination, and, quote, a presumptive biography of the human intellect. He wanted to study ideas, the imaginative and subjective descriptions of material facts, not for the sake of the ideas themselves, but to consider them in their origin and significance as natural expressions of the life of the human animal. Santayana thought ideas have symptomatic and expressive value, becoming rational as they harmonize with each other and as they adjust to facts. His interest in the Life of Reason, he wrote, quote, was not fundamentally psychological, but moral. He wished to select such turns in human sentiment as poetically, if not intellectually, rendered mankind wiser and nobler. He was collecting materials for a utopia, end quote. His aim in this historical survey of ideas was to determine what wisdom is possible for human beings, given that the human mind always is poetical. That is, given that ideas are never identical to the existences they symbolize. He did not think that rejecting poetry for science was the path to wisdom, because science contained poetry too. Science was scientific insofar as it promoted beneficial adjustment to an external world through observation and experimental action. But this scientific activity was complementary to the poetical ideas of the human mind. Santayana believed that, quote, wisdom lay rather in taking everything good-humoredly, with a grain of salt, end quote. But Santayana was explicit that he did not regard the history of human ideas as a mere comedy of errors. He was sincere in his search for wisdom, and he believed that living according to reason can achieve something when it more fully expresses the actual interests that animate it, and discerns the truth about the facts those interests direct it toward. However, after rejecting Hegel's approach, the standard of any achievement was not immediately clear to Santayana. In the decade after first reading Hegel, he found a more agreeable perspective in Plato. It was not the voluntary illusions of Plato's myths and metaphysics supporting his moral philosophy that inspired Santayana. Rather, it was the wisdom of Socrates. Santayana realized the only thing needed to criticize the life of the human intellect was self-knowledge. One need not impose an unnatural constancy on human nature in general to critique it with the aim of discerning the direction of human wisdom. Santayana thought the critic required only a definite character or perspective and a, quote, sane capacity for happiness. The inchoate idea of the Life of Reason matured in the 1890s. Santayana developed a course called Philosophy of History, Philosophy 10A, the lectures for which came from his readings of Plato, Aristotle, especially the Ethics and Politics, Bacon, Locke, Montesquieu, and Taine. This course, he claimed, established a basis for composing the Life of Reason. In 1895, he made a close reading of Thomas Hill Green's Prolegomena to Ethics, and on the end page of the book, he wrote a short outline dated 1896, recording his, quote, idea of a little system of moral philosophy, the Life of Reason. He listed 5 parts, which do not correspond to the 5 books eventually published, and a very brief paragraph about reason as a distinguishing attribute of human beings. In 1896 and 1897, he took a leave of absence and studied Greek philosophy at King's College, Cambridge University, which he credited with helping to further refine his plan for the Life of Reason. In a 1900 letter to William James, the title, The Life of Reason, appeared in Santayana's correspondence for the first time. In 1902, he wrote to his publisher that he had, quote, been at work since 1896 on a philosophical book to be called The Life of Reason. 2 years later, in 1904, he wrote to his publisher that he was sending, quote, a first installment of his magnum opus. The Life of Reason, which he wrote, represents all he had to say of any consequence. So the first 4 books, Reason in Common Sense, Reason in Society, Reason in Religion, Reason in Art, were published in 1905, and the 5th and longest book, Reason in Science, appeared in 1906. As Santayana understood it, though the 5 books showed no formal continuity, there was a system contained in the work. So in Reason in Common Sense, Santayana described reason as impulse modified by reflection in harmony with past judgments. Reflection and memory make possible a vision of the aim of impulses, that is, of ideal ends. Impulse influenced or directed by this awareness, in harmony with other impulses, is reason. To live the life of reason is to perceive and pursue ideals such that the direction of conduct and the interpretation of sense promote natural human happiness. This is a coordination of impulse and reflection, instinct and ideation, in light of the broadest human interests. Santayana wrote that the life of reason is, quote, the unity given to all existence by a mind in love with the good. And so rationality depends on distinguishing the excellent, and that distinction can be made in the last analysis only by an irrational impulse. As life is a better form given to force, so reason is a better form given to interest itself. The first book outlines the awareness of ideals and the emergence of reason from natural antecedents, that is, from impulse and disordered experience. And in particular, Santayana considers the emergence of consciousness, recognition of external objects in a unified homogeneous space, the discovery of mind and of fellow minds, the relation of ideals and existence, values and judgment of values, and human nature. He ended the book, this first book, with a promise that to give a general picture of human nature and its rational functions will be the task of the following books. He sought to fulfill the promise by examining the human activities, endeavors, and institutions that constitute society, religion, art, and science. And in the second book, Reason in Society, Santayana examined human associations and how they contribute to the life of reason. He discerned 3 stages in society: natural, free, and ideal. Santayana's investigation of natural society began with love and the family and continued through industry and government. He considered aristocratic and democratic forms of government and determined them not to be conducive to the life of reason. In free society, which can include friendship and patriotism, association is guided by ideal interest and concern for fellows becomes disinterested. Ideal society, Santayana wrote, transcends accidental conjunctions and is where, quote, the ideal interests themselves take possession of the mind. He explains that such ideal society primarily is found in religion, art, and science, which are taken up in the remaining books. In Reason and Religion, Santayana stated that religion makes an attempt to achieve the life of reason, but falls short. He thought religion promotes an ultimate harmony both within the individual soul and with that which supports the soul, making it, quote, a more conscious and direct pursuit of the life of reason than is society, science, or art, which are, in his view, tentative and lacking concern for an ultimate ideal. But religion falls short of the life of reason because it relies on imagination while mistakenly assuming both literal truth and moral authority, making it an unreliable means to happiness. However, religion may express truth as an interpretation of life or symbolic expression of moral experience. Religion, on Santayana's view, is poetry, and when recognized as such and not confused with science, it may contribute to wisdom. Santayana articulated such a contribution through historical review of religious traditions in Europe and naturalized accounts of piety, spirituality, charity, and immortality as ideal values, showing how regard for the truth of religion need not entail superstition. In Reason and Art, Santayana explained that humans influence and are influenced by the environment. And while human influence often is insignificant, it sometimes makes a change in natural objects that is congenial to the human mind. He wrote, quote, "Any operation which thus humanizes and rationalizes objects is called art. This is fully natural human activity, and it expresses reason when human impulse to act on the environment is directed by awareness of an end that fulfills the impulse. This continuity of art with natural impulses does not preclude refinement or aesthetic judgment, and Santayana distinguished industrial art and fine art. In the book, he considered music, language, and the plastic arts. He also considered the criterion of taste and the relation of art and happiness. Artistic success depends on reason and intelligence. The life of reason, he maintained, is another name for what, in the widest sense of the word, might be called art. Happiness is the end or aim of the life of reason, and art serves this moral aim. Santayana believed that the artist activity is innocent, and as is the working of any natural impulse toward its ideal, and should be free, while he also maintained that art had this moral purpose. He wrote, quote, "It is one thing to make room for genius and to respect the sudden madness of poets, and it is quite another not to judge the result by rational standards." So art, being concerned with the ideal, is an imaginative recasting of the world, and so a rehearsal of rational living. Quote, "A rational severity in respect to art simply weeds the garden. It expresses a mature aesthetic choice and opens the way to supreme artistic achievements." In the final book, Reason and Science, Santayana aimed to justify science as a natural human activity and articulate its role in the life of reason. Science, he thought, was continuous with common knowledge, differing only in its scope. He wrote, quote, "Common knowledge passes from memory to history, from history to mechanism, and having reached this point, it may stop and look back over the course it has traversed and thus become psychology." These early chapters of the book, History, Mechanism, and Psychology, cover this passage of knowledge, and these fields belong to what Santayana called physics, that half of the sciences that describes existences. Dialectic, the other half of science, elaborates ideas, and Santayana thought it the more interesting and important of the two halves. Knowledge of existence is, of course, indispensable, but it is not enough for rational life. We must know the excellence of existences. Santayana wrote, quote, "In the order of values, knowledge of existence is subsidiary to knowledge of ideals." He then examined the nature of intent to determine how moral life is a part of scientific inquiry. Understanding the nature of intent is vital for self-knowledge and moral growth, and dialectic is the method serving this understanding. Cultivating self-knowledge reveals one's ideal aims and how best to harmonize them with the world and with each other. That is, how to live rationally. In this, Santayana attempted to show how the life of reason is scientific, and he followed out this attempt with a discussion of pre-rational morality, rational ethics, and post-rational morality. The book ends with a defense of science and an argument for its necessity for the life of reason. In the year before The Life of Reason appeared, Santayana wrote to his publisher regarding the terms of publication, which he found quite favorable, especially because he expected it to take years for the edition to sell out. After the publication of The Life of Reason, Santayana responded to a letter from his publisher communicating the success of The Life of Reason. Santayana wrote that he was greatly satisfied with the recognition the work received, though he added that he did not read many reviews, finding it an unprofitable activity. Prominent reviewers were not agreed in their judgment, though some admired it greatly. While G.E. Moore found the work unclear, F.C.S. Schiller praised the literary style, and John Dewey called The Life of Reason, quote, the most adequate contribution America has yet made, always excepting Emerson, to moral philosophy. The 5 books of The Life of Reason were published in 1905 and 1906, and the first corrected printing appeared in 1917. In that time, Santayana had become quite critical of the work, and from 1917 to 1948, he had little good to write about it in his letters. But in 1922, he still was willing to submit errata to his publisher and to write a new preface. In retrospect, he found The Life of Reason hopelessly lost in the subjective, and he found the title obscure and unfortunate. In the 1930s, he characterized the work as professorial and lecture-like, and philosophically less fundamental than his later books. And he thought the style often verbose and academic, though he acknowledged that the presupposition of the work was not superficial. By the late 1940s, he still complained about the style, and he wished he, quote, could erase all that cheap work, end quote. But he admitted there were good sentences and paragraphs that he liked when he happened to find them quoted. In 1950, he wrote that the second book of The Life of Reason began to displease him as soon as it was published. In 1951, at the request of his publisher, Santayana undertook with his assistant, Daniel Corey, making a 1-book abridgment of The Life of Reason. After going over the work closely, Santayana still found parts of it juvenile, superficial, and a little cocky and flighty. But he also commented in letters from that time that he found the text better written than expected, and much like his latest views. Santayana died in 1952 before the 1-volume abridgment was completed, but his letters indicate that he remained supportive of the rejuvenation of his first great work, which Corey completed and saw published in 1954. In 2016, the Santayana edition completed publication of the critical edition of The Life of Reason, 5 books right there. These 5 books, published by the MIT Press beginning in 2011, present the original work in a form as close to the author's intention as can be determined by examination of manuscripts, correspondence, and the author's marked up reading copies. The 5 books make up Volume 7 of the projected 20 volumes of the critical edition of the works of George Santayana. These 20 volumes will consist of 33 books, of which the Santayana edition has now published 19. As part of this work, the edition has restored chapters held out of the first edition of Santayana's 3-book autobiography and published it as he wished it to appear, as the single book, Persons and Places. So all 3 original books are now bound in 1 book. The Santayana edition has published in 8 books the most complete collection of Santayana's letters and produced 2 books of marginalia from his personal library. The autobiography, letters, and marginalia are especially helpful for understanding Santayana's intentions and judgments regarding his other works, as I have drawn on them extensively in my discussion here of The Life of Reason. The efforts of the Santayana edition have also led to new discoveries of letters and manuscripts. The edition has produced electronic versions available on our website of previously unpublished class notes and Santayana's translation of Aristotle's Metaphysics. It appears it was a group work that he did with students when he was teaching at Harvard. Recently, the edition learned of 300 pages of newly available Santayana documents from Columbia University Library's archival collection, which includes letters from Santayana to his friend Baron Albert von Westenholz, whom Santayana described as one of the best educated persons I have ever known. The letters to Westenholz, written between 1903 and 1937, will be transcribed and made available electronically on the Santayana edition website, along with transcriptions and translations of letters to Santayana from his father, Augustine. In addition to these discoveries and restorations, there is a further value of a critical edition. It is perhaps the chief value, and it lies in the stability and integrity of the text established through historical research and critical editing procedures. Knowing the history of the printed text allows editors to identify different versions of the text and to determine variance among the different versions. Critical editing methodology includes recording and justifying with evidence and argument any emendation or preference for one variant over another. a published critical edition always includes a list of all the variants of the critically edited text and the editor's rationales for choosing one variant as definitive, making the origins of the critical text transparent. The result is a reliable text that scholars can use with confidence. Without a critical edition, the Life of Reason exists in several forms, among which the differences are not immediately apparent. One readily available reprinting of the work presents itself as the first edition, but does not acknowledge that it contains several changes from the actual first printing. A version presented as the second edition is not actually a new edition, but it is the third version with variants, and the true second edition makes changes that Santayana himself was not in favor of. The critical edition sorts this out and creates a text as close to the author's intentions based on the text closest to the author's hand, and any notes or corrections made in the author's hand. This text is important as a common reference for scholarly discussions and interpretation. While this may not seem as dramatic as restoring lost or expurgated chapters, it is hugely important to scholarly activity. For example, in cases where various versions exist, with some being misidentified, such as the so-called first edition Life of Reason that already had variants introduced, misquotations that lead to disputes among scholars face additional obstacles to resolution when a common text cannot be identified. The principles of critical editing also make plain why the one-volume abridgment of the Life of Reason should be considered a new work entirely. Besides being an abridgment, Daniel Corey completed it after Santayana's death, so the final form was out of Santayana's hands. This work was not considered when determining the critical text, but its variants were noted and included as an appendix in the critical edition. It is offered for comparison, but not for justification for any part of the critical text. The integrity and stability of the text is the most consistent benefit of a critical edition. In providing a common reference for scholarly discussion and interpretation, a critical edition contributes to the conscious harmony of intentions that is the Life of Reason. It is my hope that you may be convinced of the importance of not only Santayana's philosophy, but also of critical editing more generally, and of the institutions that support it, as in the case of the Santayana edition, the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Coleman and Professor Lachs.
Let me first thank all of you for being interested in Santayana. It's an interest that pays dividends. I was invited to talk about the Life of Reason, so let me talk about something else. The reason why I want to talk about something else is that the Life of Reason I don't think is Santayana's best work by far. It's got far too much William James, far too much his senior colleague Royce, and we've heard a wonderful double exposition. You don't need a third person talking about it. Let me talk about what matters to me, and that is how Santayana has rendered my philosophical life alive, and how he continues to inspire me. Not that I agree with everything he says, but it's one wonderful line that I've got to share with you. When he talks about life and death, he says, some people think that we're too good for extinction, and he debunks that. I want to talk about skepticism and animal faith. 1923, a major work. Everything turns on this work. It's novel, it's exciting, it's something that has not had the tremendous amount of attention that it deserves. Skepticism and animal faith starts with a claim. The claim is that when chips are down, everything can be doubted. The history of philosophy is full of incomplete skeptics. Descartes' skepticism is ludicrous. He can't, Santayana points this out, he can't seem to be able to get over the idea that he can doubt the I. If you can't doubt the I, you can't doubt. Santayana essentially runs down the list. He talks about doubting the past and all kinds of things that I do that I don't remember, and all other things that I think I remember about the past, in fact, are wrong. About the future, nobody's a soothsayer. A lot of people claim they are, but they don't know very much. And then he comes to the sad fact that even the present, so long as he put it in propositional form, even the present is dubious. Am I speaking to you now? Am I dreaming this? Are you dreaming me? Wake up. Just pulling your leg. So we end up with one thing that cannot be doubted, and that is the immediately present object of consciousness. The immediately present object of consciousness is, if you look out the window, there is something that looks metallic. But notice I didn't say is metallic. I don't know what it is. It may be a picture. It may be something that somebody put there to fool us. There's no way in which I can know anything about it except the way it appears to me. But watch what you say, what appears to me. Who is the me? Well, maybe there is no me. Maybe it's just the way it appears. And he calls this appearance, be very careful with the word appearance. He calls this appearance an essence. And part of what he wants to do from 1923, actually earlier than 1933 on, what he wants to do is to resuscitate the language of the medievals. And thus he uses words like essence and substance and matter out of Aristotle and out of other thinkers, but with new meaning. So what he says concerning essence is that it is not in time. It is not something that is in a flow of consciousness. It's a momentary appearance. But that's the only thing we can be sure of. And what does it say about the world? Nothing. Did I hear that there was a world? There's no world out there, for all I know. So Santayana essentially reduces the skeptical enterprise into silence. That's an honest skeptic. And that enables him all of a sudden to come up with a new way of doing philosophy. It's the philosophy of animal faith. The animal faith is what we believe in as a result of our being in a location, in a situation, having to do what we need to do, having to eat, having to live, having to communicate. He says the basics of animal faith are such as things that are lost can be found. Now, you immediately think of George Berkeley, the idealist, because Berkeley had the notion that there's only mind, and mind is not something that needs to be challenged or can be challenged. So Santayana is of the opinion that when all is said and done, you have to be honest in your philosophy. The honesty of philosophy is believe only that which is indubitable because of your actions. It's not that they're indubitable in terms of the mind's demands of evidence. No, that's not what it's about. What it's about is something altogether different. What it's about is putting yourself in a situation where you accept what you have to do. So you eat, things nourish. As he says, in Realm of Matter, he says, substance is food. That's everybody consumes everything, or at least many things. So this notion of animal faith as a method of philosophical inquiry, absolutely fascinating. He doesn't call it himself that, but that's what it is. It's a notion where philosophers have to be radically honest with themselves and with their students and with their friends, and believe only that which is available to them in personal experience. Only in personal experience. Now, when Santayana reaches this level, he reconstructs the world of belief. He reconstructs it from the ground up, from essence up, all the way to spirit, which is consciousness as it engages the material world. I'm not crazy about this way of rebuilding the edifice of experience. The reason I'm not crazy about it is because that's how you overcome skepticism, but that is not how the enterprise of animal faith proceeds. The enterprise of animal faith does not proceed from somewhere on the basis of which something on the basis of which we can say, well, maybe there is motion in the world, or maybe there is food in the world. That's not how it goes. It plunges into everyday life. So everyday life determines our philosophical system. I think that's magnificent. Okay. At the same time as he's a materialist, which means that he thinks there's only one world and it's this one, and that this world operates on the basis of what there is in it, which means matter moving in space over time. Now, that kind of a materialist normally will say, well, there's no room for religion and there's no room for anything like spirituality. You find in Santayana the most magnificent affirmation of spirituality. How does he do it? How does he do it? Let me tell you how he does it. It's very simple. You folks here are behind Nashville with flowers. Not because you don't get flowers, but you get them late. When I walk to my office at Vanderbilt, there is a field of violets. Purple on one side, white on the other. And I walk to work that way. And sometimes you'll think me crazy. Sometimes I go down on all fours because I like to see violets face to face. I have to give them a chance to see my face. For a moment, I am totally absorbed. For a moment, I'm totally taken over. That's spirituality. Spirituality is not something that takes me to another realm. is something that enables me to enjoy the immediate. As he says in Platonism and the Spiritual Life, it's when the ultimate becomes immediate. The ultimate is essence, becomes immediate. You come across it, you see it, you are absorbed in it. Life stops, time stops. This is what makes life worth living, as far as Santayana is concerned. Now that I wholly embrace. It's that moment. It's a magnificent moment. I sometimes do this with students, and they think I'm nuts. But we've got something called dogwood, and it has a faint scent. And I never talk to students without being outside and saying, come over here. Next to something called Carolina Tinkerbells, whole little bells in flower form. Next to that, I have the red buds, and they totally take over my life. Now that's Santayana's philosophy of life. Okay, maybe one or two more points. I think it's wonderful to have an ontology that sorts things out. Santayana breaks through in his preparations to write and to publish the 1923 book, Skepticism and Animal Faith. He breaks through because he now has a vision of the universe, a vision that is philosophically significant, a vision that is defensible, a vision that converts the old categories of the medievals into something that is meaningful and understandable for us today. This is an ontology. It's not a metaphysics. No, he says in the introduction to Skepticism and Animal Faith, he says, I don't do metaphysics. If metaphysics is merely a matter of finding hidden things, then the chambermaid in peeling a potato is doing metaphysics. Well, because the potato beyond the skin has some kind of hidden parts, hidden parts that you eat. So, to me, Santayana is a living philosopher. It's wonderful that Harvard is beginning to acknowledge that he is one of your own. I wrote a dissertation on Santayana with a guy by the name of T.G. Henderson, who wrote a dissertation with Whitehead on Santayana. And a magnificent dissertation it was. Henderson visited Santayana in his last days and came away with an amazing regard for the man, because the man was a living embodiment of his own philosophy. And you know, if we can do that, I don't know how much more philosophy needs to do. I thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Professor Lachs, Professor Coleman, Professor Moreno. And we'll open the floor for discussion for a bit. Anyone have questions or comments? Go ahead. Jump on in. Yeah.
In English, Professor Moreno, in Spanish, is for you?
Better in English. If I need a translator, Clara will tell me.
I really don't know much about
Santayana except the memories I have of a teacher of mine, a professor of mine here in Boston, Concha Sardoya, who used to talk about him. And so I've read just a little bit of Santayana, and I remember reading that he used to complain about students, Harvard students. They don't study. They don't like to read. And I'm wondering, when I heard Professor Moreno talk about the disappointment or whatever here at Harvard, he wasn't really very comfortable here. I wonder if that had something to do with it. Thinking, listening to you, that after he went to Oxford, perhaps in search of something more intellectual, I don't know. I wonder if you know anything about this, the fact that...
It's a very interesting question. En español, y ella traduce, ¿no? Una vez la frase de Santayana era precisamente que la filosofía no es erudición sino forma de vida. Por eso él estuvo dando clases durante 20 años, pero no le gustaba en absoluto dar clases, no solo que los estudiantes no estudiaban, no solo eso, sino que ser profesor implica un poco de teatro, un poco de mantener un punto de vista que no es real, que no es humano. Él decía, la filosofía no es erudición, es otra cosa, un verbo, una cita de Josófon, usofía, en griego, que ser filósofo no es ser erudito, no es saber filosofía. Él se dedicó a ser filósofo realmente en su vida. En Oxford no dio clase, no buscaba al estudiante ideal, sencillamente buscaba un lugar donde pasar la Primera Guerra Mundial, que ya fue muy dura. ¿Era muy largo?
So he was quoting a sentence saying that Santayana was saying that philosophy is not having knowledge, it's not being really, a person with a lot of knowledge, it's just a way of life. And that he actually didn't really like to be a professor. So he actually said, oh no, being a professor is like acting. You have to perform. You have to sometimes keep a point of view that might not be yours. And he didn't really like that. So the reason why he went to Oxford, there in Oxford, he didn't teach at all. He was not a professor. He was just trying to get away with, trying to find a place actually to go through the World War I. That's mainly why he went to Oxford. He didn't teach there.
Y no es cierto que ser profesor es mentir algo. To be a teacher is to lie always. That's how it is. We are always lying. True. Lying in some sense, no?
He did have complaints about undergraduates, but he also made dear friends of some of them, some few of them, the ones that read.
Good. Other questions?
Is there something about language in his work? Because it's so pragmatic and one main point in pragmatics is the language, is communication, but I didn't find any
about language and
reference
life of reason.
to language. Not linguistics, but
On the origin of language, no? And the role they play in our life, I think, but I don't remember exactly.
Oh, it's well, there are two discussions, right? In science and in common sense.
I think so.
But the first one, I mean, I think what he's doing when he talks about language goes to what I was talking about in Reason and Science. He wants to distinguish dialectics from physics. And so when he talks about language, I think it's mostly in the service of talking about dialectics or this elaboration of ideas. And the discussion in Common Sense is what he calls concretions and discourse, as opposed to existences. And so I'm not sure what
And in the set of beauty, he speaks about
right.
Poetry, the prose, and so on. I think the language as a way of art. The role the language play in art.
That's true. So it's in Reason and Art.
And
That's
Reason
where he
in
talks
Art
about.
too. Okay.
He talks about language there in terms of when he talks about poetry. But it's also, he talks about the origin of language there. I'm not recalling brilliant insights that I'm sure he had, but I'm not.
In general, the better you write, the less you write about writing.
I do have a question, and I haven't read a lot about Santayana. I just want to point out that some high school students, I have a student from Boston Latin School here. Santayana graduated from Boston Latin School. And Alex got interested into Santayana, would like to know more, and said, okay, let's go through Santayana's. And he goes into the archives of Boston Latin School when he was a student, and what he did at Boston Latin School as a teenager, high school, and reading what he wrote in the paper that he was. So I don't know if Alex wants to say something where he had fun, but it is very interesting to see some young people being interested in Santayana, and that's why we are just representing Boston Latin School here.
Excellent. Alex, did he write for the newspaper, the school newspaper, or?
Yeah, the Register. He started it.
So he wrote a regular column, or?
I think he started the whole newspaper as like a literary and like the news school newspaper, but then it kind of progressed to more like a literary thing, which it is now.
Fantastic.
It was a register, wasn't it? The article, right?
No, just the Register.
Yeah, the register.
Let me ask you a question. I love this idea of philosophy not just as a bunch of stuff that you know, but somehow tied up with a form of existence, a form of life, which is, of course, a classical idea, an ancient idea. And I wonder how it interacts with the particular details of the philosophy that we heard about. So philosophy, how does he apply it? I mean, when he argues that our life should be a life of reason, how does that affect how exactly does that affect the way we live our life? I was interested to see that the word reason is not logos from Aristotle, but nous. So how does he understand that distinction? How in general does this philosophy change the way you live your life? You guys? I mean, maybe your story about spirituality is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he writes about how he enjoys a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing wrong with that being a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be about God.
Yeah.
So seeking out these and leaving time for them, giving occasions to oneself, then one can enjoy the beauty of life. I think those are good philosophical things to do.
How are they related to reason?
Oh, I left reason out.
I think his departure from Harvard was part of his pursuit of that, because we already heard about the conflicts that it created in him. And he lived a really deliberate life after his mother died and he left Harvard. And I don't think he would, I can't see him ever saying that this is I mean, the way that he talks about reason is not that there is the path that you have to take to live the life of reason, and that was his path. That was the way that he spelled it out. But I think the decisions he made to leave the university, to not get married, to live that traveling life, was the way that he tried to harmonize those impulses. But I also, I mean, I say that because I think that's one way to talk about the life of reason, but I find it more appealing to talk about the cultivation of spirituality in that biographical.
You were right in saying that often the 5 volumes are considered his naturalistic version of Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. That turns me off right there. And you articulated some of the reasons why one feels okay being turned off by Hegel and the straitjacket in which he places the development of mind.
Sí, me gustaría responder también. Su modo de ser filósofo evita centrarse en cuestiones meramente técnicas. Le parecen discusiones bizantinas. Y yo creo que durante el siglo XX ha habido muchas discusiones bizantinas en la universidad. Ser filósofo para él es responder a cuestiones básicas de la vida como la muerte, la felicidad, la divinidad y la animalidad del ser humano. Esto es filosofía para él. Las cuestiones que son las cuestiones palpitantes y eternas de la filosofía siempre, que me temo que gran parte de la filosofía evita porque son incómodas. Muy incómodo hacerse las grandes preguntas.
So he believes that Santayana actually it's avoiding this kind of technical questions. He's not trying to answer that. He believes that that's like really old. That's also something that everybody is doing. So he really wants to answer those questions related to things like death, happiness, divinity, questions that are not really comfortable to answer, and that's where his main work focuses on.
Aunque sus respuestas seguramente serían aceptadas por pocas personas. No todo el mundo acepta un punto de vista filosófico. Como ha dicho Coleman y Lachs, la mayoría de la gente prefiere la ilusión, prefiere imaginar otro mundo para no vivir en este. Y decir que es este el que hay y hay que vivir en él intensamente, no lo acepta todo el mundo. Y menos todo el planeta.
So his answers might not be really well accepted for many people. A lot of people don't really like his philosophy and the fact that they all prefer to create an illusion. Instead of accepting, oh, this is the world we have to live in, we just created an illusion and don't go through that, as both of you kind of explained before.
Honesty. Honesty is a good word. Honesty.
So his ideas were not really well accepted.
And sincerity, yes.
Honesty,
Sincerity.
sincerity,
Okay.
yeah, truth, kind of.
I think what's practical about pursuing, the practical way to pursue the life of reason, I think Daniel talks about it in his book in Pursuing Sanity, and so disillusionment. But I think maybe the broadest way to answer that is self-knowledge or self-awareness. And I see that in writers that strike me as deeply philosophical and important, and somebody that really comes to my mind is James Baldwin, as someone who really was forced to pursue sanity and self-awareness. And I like that example because it's, I mean, on the surface it's somebody that, you know, you might not think of in connection with Santayana. We have time for one last question. Anyone want to get the last one in?
Hearing what you're saying about Santayana, it seems like there's an oriental thing, like an ancient Chinese spiritual mood around with his philosophy. Was he in touch with this kind of philosophy, or do you read?
Sí. Definitivamente sí. A través de Schopenhauer, Santayana leyó a Schopenhauer y Schopenhauer fue el introductor del pensamiento oriental en Alemania y por lo tanto en el resto del mundo académico. Santayana leyó el texto filosófico fundamental de oriental, no recuerdo el nombre ahora mismo. Siempre tuvo muy en cuenta el pensamiento indio, hindú, siempre. Y uno de los últimos proyectos de su vida era establecer un diálogo, en lugar del diálogo tradicional entre Europa y Estados Unidos, un diálogo entre Occidente y Oriente. Ese era su último gran tema en el que estuvo trabajando. Y nada más actual que eso. Cuando entendamos Oriente y Occidente, quizá haya paz. Quizá.
So, yeah, definitely there's a connection. He read one of the most important works by Schopenhauer, and that's actually Schopenhauer was the one that introduced Oriental philosophy, Oriental thinking in Germany. So that's where he got all the inspiration, and he also had this a really big connection with India and the Hindi way of thinking. And he didn't see this philosophy as a dialogue between Europe and the US, but as a kind of like the objective was to establish dialogue between Western and Oriental culture. Like there will be peace once that dialogue is actually established.
Excellent. As against his students, come back to that, he read everything.
Excellent. Well, let's stop with that then. Thank you to our speakers.